fasting for a peaceful result. Ushers, you may be seated. Thank you so much. The word for fast here in this text is the only passage in Scripture where the word is used and it strictly refers to hunger. Because the normal Hebrew word in the derivatives, which we find links fasting as a sign that one is experiencing some great sorrow. Fasting in the Old Testament, mourning is further tied to fasting as in the putting on of sackcloth. It's putting on of ashes in mourning in Esther chapter 4 and 3. One who fasts always finds themselves afflicting themselves or their soul. It's in fasting that a person's inner person is in somewhat of turmoil. And so in fasting we find that generally one fasts because one is in trouble. One fasts because in the Old Testament there was something gone awry. Fasting periods could last from 40 days to a simple sunrise to sunset. Fasting could be on behalf of somebody else, as in the king in this text, who enters his fast not for himself, but enters this fast because of Daniel. Fasting was either total or partial abstinence from food or something of that nature. And while in fasting and mourning, some even fasted when they tried to circumvent death, as in the case of Daniel. But in severe and long-term grief, no matter what was going on, one key thing about fasting was always obvious, that people fasted to gain the attention of God. It is in gaining the attention of God that we see fast like that of Esther when her nation was in a critical period and a critical decision and intervention was needed. So she called for a collective fast to gain God's attention. People fasted in cases where execution was about to take place and they wanted to stay the hand of the executioner. Even people like Jezebel, the scripture says in 1 Kings 21 and 9, knew how to fast in times of trouble. So fasting, my brothers and sisters, sometimes brought on national healing. Fasting sometimes brought on great breakthrough. But one key thing about a fast, the person fasting always consecrated themselves to God. Joel chapter 1 verse 14 says, consecrate a fast. Call the solemn assembly, gather the elders and the inhabitants of the land to the house of the Lord your God, and afflict yourselves with joy and appreciation. Joel presents something that we will learn in the fasting classes, is that all fast does not have to end with sackcloth and ashes. But sometimes an individual can go on a fast that brings joy to their soul. Sometimes the outcome of a fast can be such that it not only lifts me into the presence of God, but Joel and Zechariah and others point out to us that God can sometimes find pleasure in our fast. Zechariah 7 and 5 say, unto those who fast on the 7th and on the 70th days, where is your fasting? And when you read Zechariah 7 and 5, the Lord ends it with joy, but asks the question that all of us must answer. Were you fasting for me? Were you fasting to be in my presence? Were you fasting for my joy? Or were you fasting for your own edification? Dear beloved, I've come to you today to kind of allow you to understand when we enter our fast in the beginning of the year, you must learn and appreciate the fact that no matter who calls cause the fast, no matter what the occasion of the fast, whatever you lay individually before God as we lay collectively, this church, your fast must be that the will of God be made known and executed in your life. If we fast for any other reason, all of our fasting is in vain. And so in this particular text, which is well known, everybody knows the story of Daniel and the lion's den, but very few folk understand that the king himself caused this mess and is the one who fasts through this particular predicament. It's the king who made a foolish decision and now goes into personal mourning for what he has caused, hoping to find a peaceful resolve. So I want to help you real quick, give you 3 points and sit down. That many times in our journey, we have to be very careful in our fast preparation about what we cause and what we're trying to get out of. Because oftentimes when you look at the text, Daniel was a man, an upright man who had really done all that he could in captivity to uplift his king. He was in captivity, but they had become one of the ruling governors of the land because in Daniel was found no guile. Daniel never caused any uprising. Daniel never caused any backbiting. Daniel was never the center of controversy. The only thing that Daniel ever asked the king and the nation, 3 times a day, let me call on the name of my God. Yes. The only thing that Daniel's friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ever asked the king in their captivity was, let me bow down to only my God. But because the king had gotten besides himself, because the king had risen up to a point where Darius was now over a kingdom that had 120 princes. He had so many countries that he had delegated such vast responsibility that folk began to think Darius was a god himself. Listening to the hype of other folk, because other folk will make you think you're more than you actually are. You know that, don't you? Other folk will think that you can do things that God have not ordained. Listening to other folk who pumped his head and made him speak without thinking, Darius issued a proclamation that really hurt him more than the kingdom. He listened to other folk who allowed him to think that he was a god and issued a proclamation that nobody could be found praying to anybody but Darius over a given period of time. Because his head was swelling with those things that other folk were saying, Daniel here was not included in the conversation. He was not included as oftentimes in the past for the decision. The king, caught up in liquor and big words, made a proclamation that created a problem. I want to tell you that sometimes you got to fast because your problems have arose through your proclamation. We often say, speak those things as if they were. And oftentimes you don't understand what you're speaking. Let me help you with something in the text. I recall once that person gave me some advice in my business life that said, you're in a position now, Larry, where you can't joke with folk anymore. I said, I don't know what you mean. They said, well, simply put, your words now are no longer humorous. Your words are policy statements. When you speak, people listen and take it as a policy. And so sometimes we've got to make sure that what we speak in certain ears, we have to understand that our words may carry more weight than we imagine. You have to understand that every time you speak, somebody is listening. Every time you utter a word, many folk are paying attention. And so sometimes what you think is a casual comment changes the whole course of life for somebody whom you may not even know. And so the king here makes a proclamation, not thinking through that his words are going to cause him to lose his closest ally. And I'm here to tell you that sometimes in our life we speak words without thinking. We speak words not knowing that the enemy is in earshot. Do you realize that every time you open your mouth, the devil is hanging on every word because he wants to use your words against you? If you don't believe me, let me wake somebody up and have you look at the text and really begin to understand that what Darius is doing in the text is similar here to what happened to Eve. When the devil came to Eve and said, "Did not God say?" In other words, he was trying to use God's words and Eve's belief against her. And that's the same thing that the enemy will try to do to each and every one of us. When you stand here and say, "I will trust in the Lord until I die," you better believe that by the time you get out, the enemy gonna see, can you do it? When you say, "This joy that I have, the world didn't give it and the world can't take it away," you better believe before you get outside this door, the enemy is going to take those words and try to make you eat them. You need to understand that whatever you speak, the enemy hears and he wants to see how he can use it against you. So oftentimes the things that we speak into the universe looking for blessing can turn around and become our cussing. That's right, I said cussing, not cursing. Because oftentimes the thing you speak causes you to forget this tongue ought to have a tongue of praise. And the things you have said sometimes made James utter the words, "Out of the same mouth come blessing and cussing." My brethren, it ought not be. It's because some of us have lost track of what God has in store that we speak things out of response to other folk that oftentimes, I believe, in frivolous discussion, we come up with some delusional declarations out of our mouth that make no sense to us or anybody else. In other words, we say things that truly do not indicate what we're capable of doing. So we got a problem that arose out of our own proclamation. And here I stand seeking help from God out of the mess I have created. I wonder if there's anybody here who ever created a mess and then thought God could get you out of it. I wonder if there's anybody here who ever really recognized that the problem you're in is your own undertaking. You caused this problem. You spoke these things into being. You said whatever you said about the relationship you're in. I hear you, but many of us have heard God, but. And as a result, we're now hoping that God would hear us. But he can't because he didn't put it together. And therefore, the situation that we're in is a result of our own foolish proclamation. And so the Bible allows us to understand that there are many folk who have been troubled over their words. Even great men like King Herod in the New Testament, in Matthew 14 and 9, his words made a quick utterance of, "Ask me what you will, and it's yours." And when the young lady responded, "Give me the head of John the Baptist," the record said the king was exceedingly sorry, but because of his oath and his guests, he did not want to break his word. Sometimes we are forced to do some things only because it's our word. And let me help you. Your word ought to be your bond. If there is nothing else that I can trust in you or believe about you, I ought to believe your word. The vow that you make, the word that you ought to carry some weight. And therefore, when you speak it, you ought to be trying to make it. And what the text allows us to see in this king, he spoke a word and he could not go back on his word. He was there proclaiming something into a current existence that spies of his right-hand man, enemies of Daniel, had trapped the king with his own word. They were people that Romans 3:15 described as folk with feet that are swift to shed innocent blood. Do you recognize that there's some folk right by you who are faster than that boy from Jamaica who sang when it comes to certain stuff can get around. Folk don't even need a text, as they say in England, a mobile, or anything else to get the word with. Some folk have swift feet that can't wait to trap you with your own words. And so here I have a problem arising out of my words, the problematic proclamation that this guy utters becomes the downfall, he thinks, of Daniel. But how many folk know that 2 Timothy 3:12 still rings true? When Timothy was told by Paul that those who will live godly will suffer persecution. But then David added a tidbit to this and said, many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivereth them out of them all. And Jesus had to tag to that and said, these kind come only by prayer and fasting. So the king has a problematic issue here. Proclamation that he has uttered out of his own mouth have created a problem. He's trying to understand how I can resolve this in a peaceful way. The enemies of Daniel have him now by his own words. And I've said, in your position, no one can ever change the king's word. So now we find the king in verse 14. Hearing these words, he's upset. And what does he do? He sets his heart on Daniel to deliver him. I want to tell you that your problem arises through your proclamation. But in your problem, you ought to learn to seek deliverance through other possibilities. In other words, I want to draw closer to God so that my possibilities and my outcome may open up more than what I can imagine. You see, my brothers and sisters, there are more possible outcomes to any situation we have if we can draw closer to God. The issue that we have, the problem that we're dealing with, we can't see our way out because our mind is limited. Our knowledge is not infinite. And therefore, we struggle trying to find a peaceful result. But what this king does, he sets his heart to deliver Daniel. He looks at every possibility that may emerge. And I'm here to tell you, when the peace in your life is disrupted, you are willing to explore every possibility under the sun to regain it. There is nothing like regaining your peace once it has been lost. And so here this king sits trying to get his mind focused on God, trying to get his mind focused on his friend, trying to think, is there any loopholes in the law? Is there any utterances or any past precedents where I can override this situation? Is there any mighty men that can maybe come to Daniel's rescue? Is there any way I can peacefully resolve this by remaining king and keeping Daniel out of the lion's den? But I gotta tell you, brothers and sisters, there are certain lion's dens we all just have to go through. There are certain lion's dens that no matter how the possibilities may look, we have to be cast in. There are certain lion dens that there is no possible way out of escape. There are certain lion dens that we're going to have to go in, and because we have not consulted with God in a timely manner, that sometimes God has to place us in something that makes us understand the only way out is through Him. And I don't know about you, but oftentimes in life I've tried possible outcomes that have arisen out of my mind. I've tried to deliver myself out of situations I created, thinking if I created this mess, truly I can deliver myself out of yourself and begin to understand, just like this king. When he set his heart on his delivery, he did not find an answer. But when he got in his palace, I would love for my secret closet to be a palace. When he got into his palace, the record says that he had extended all possible thought, but had finally come to the conclusion that there was no favorable outcome. And so before he enters his palace, the record says he looks to Daniel. And sometime when you are casting folk in a lion's den, you better recognize who they are. And not only who they are, but whose they are. Because now he has extended every possibility. And he looks down and commands the folk to bring Daniel and cast him into the den of life. But this time when he speaks, he says unto Daniel, thy God whom you serve, continually, Daniel, he will deliver you. The other possibility that you have in your situation is that you better recognize who you serve. And you better recognize in the lion's den, you can't be spotted with your service to the Lord. But the text says, whom you serve continually. In other words, you served him in good times and bad. You served him with proclamation and without proclamation. You served him when you were in Jerusalem and now in captivity. And the same God that brought you out of captivity will be the same God, Daniel, that will serve you and bring you out of the lion's den. And so, beloved, I've come to let you know that sometime when you've exhausted all possibility, Mark 9 and 20, this kind can only be driven out by prayer and fasting. And so the king went back into his palace. His problem comes through his proclamation. He seeks deliverance in other possibilities, but he begins to understand that there is purposeful preservation. In other words, when he goes in his prayer closet, he begins to fast and ask God what's going on. Look at, if you will, he turns off his stereo. He dismisses the band with the instruments of music. His sleep leaves him where he's up all night. And he passed the night fasting away with God in prayer. And what he finds is that when you fast and look to God, that God has a way of making you see things that you never saw before. When you fast and get close in the presence with God, God has a way of letting you see that there is a purpose even in the lion's den. When you fast and get close to God, he lets you see that the peaceful result is not that I take you before you get in the den, but sometime to resolve the conflict, I've got to let you lay with the lions. I've got to let you lay deep in the den. I've got to let somebody see just who I am. I could stop you before you get in the middle of your situation, but sometime I got to let the situation get in the middle of you. And I've come to let somebody know that you're in a conflicting situation. And the only peaceful result is you're going to have to lay there all night. You may have to lay there all day. But I want you to know, if you ever go down in prayer and fasting, that God has a way of turning your lion's den into a place of comfort. He has a way of transforming your life into somebody that can help you make it through the night. Ezra 8 and 23 said, so we fasted and implored our God, and he heard become your prayer warrior. When you fast, God can make those who would rise against you become the helping hand that have to lift you up. When you fast, you'll find that God can not only make your enemy your footstool, but He can change their mind, change their heart. Here is Daniel in the lion den, but the king has seen something. How many of you would put a man in a lion's den, fast all night long, get up early and run to the den and speak a word like the man is still alive? God showed the king, don't worry, I got Daniel in the palm of my hand. And somebody here, if you ever want a peaceful result, you better fast. You don't wait into the palm of His hand. If you ever want a peaceful result, you better learn how to lift it up and fast, that God would have His way. Daniel